Cronkite News starts now.
Good evening and welcome to Cronkite News on Arizona PBS. I'm Sydney Whitty. Tonight we take a look at the award-winning content from Cronkite News and Cronkite Sports. We were honored with several student production awards from the Rocky Mountain chapter of the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences. As the country mourns, the gun control debate takes center stage yet again.
Tonight, we have full team coverage on the two very different battles state and federal lawmakers are fighting in the wake of this most recent mass shooting. Let's go first to Jake Holter in our Washington Bureau with the latest on today's hearing on gun control. Jake? The COVID-19 pandemic has been hard on small businesses, but Cronkite News reporter Tyler Manion went inside a local staple to find out about a different type of struggle the coronavirus has caused.
Film Bar is a unique combination of exactly what you'd expect, a place to view films and a bar. But when I went to get the story of yet another business that struggled through COVID, what I found here was different and deeper than what I've heard before. The reels started rolling at Film Bar in downtown Phoenix 10 years ago. Since, it's been called a cultural epicenter for the city. Owner Kelly Aubie created a place that reminds people of home.
It's a little bit like going to see a film in a really interesting living room with, 75 of your best friends.
But COVID-related health precautions made that impossible. And Film Bar was like the 62% of businesses that saw a loss of revenue nationwide.
Our numbers are down 90% or greater.
Aubie considered turning out the lights for good. A decision had to be made. And while the comfortable business plan was this indoor seating arrangement, now all of these seats would be empty. So we had to adapt, and did so by changing locations. The solution was to make an outdoor theater with, yes, a huge screen and slightly different chairs. But the emotional toll the pandemic took was strong.
I've always kind of thought of myself as somebody who was pretty good at managing his feelings about stuff and kind of a strong guy and can move forward. But there have been long periods of time where I'm not sure I have anything left.
This constant struggle is the less discussed side of COVID-19's impact on small business. In many ways, it was the straw that almost broke this entrepreneur's back.
I just didn't see a way forward. And it didn't, at the moment, feel as sad as you might think. I was so tired and beat up at that point that it kind of felt like a relief that I could admit to myself that it was time to move on from this.
But then came a surge of support on social media, with hundreds of people commenting, sharing, and most importantly donating. Aubie had no choice. And going from stale popcorn on the floor of an abandoned theater to this would help start to swing those emotions. So would success at the new location.
To see a full house again, with people that are ready to see this production. And I addressed the crowd when I walked up. I mean, it almost brought a tear to my eye because it was like, there they are, Not there they are because, hey, maybe my business is going to make it, but there they are because they're getting out.
Now, it's back to the mission of bringing people together through film. Selling a few drinks and showing films again are the important first steps. Because while movies unite a community, enjoy the show. So do small businesses. Film Bar has applied for the SVG grant, which would award them 45% of gross revenue from 2019 and save the business. If they don't get it, though, Aubie will be faced with yet another tough decision. In the studio, Tyler Manion, Cronkite News.
I told my daughter, I said, I'll be back, I'm gonna go get Carlos. So when I'm on my way and I cried on the freeway and I cried and cried. And I thought about what my cousin said. My cousin told me, call 211 to get out.
My mom picked me up. She asked me if I wanted to go to the shelter. Now she's asked me previously before that many times, and I've always said no because I didn't want to be seen as, poor and all that stuff.
I always stayed with my ex-husband because I didn't want my kids to be embarrassed living in a shelter,
I just remembered getting a phone call from my brother and a text from my mom telling me to grab all my stuff and pack. I was kind of nervous.
We went home that night and we went to go get all our stuff ready, and we just left. We grabbed whatever we could.
Marshall Shore, known as Arizona's hip historian, is known for his vivid storytelling, cult-like following, and expertise on the history of the valley. Now he's writing himself into our state's history by purchasing a headstone for a gender pioneer from the early 1900s. Caitlin Keenahan has this intriguing story.
Imagine the way Arizona looked in the early 1900s. The streets, the people, with stories beyond the documented black and white.
People kept saying there was no history here.
But Marshall Shore sees history in color.
I'm known as Arizona's hip historian.
Also known as a local celebrity.
So I want to welcome you to Arizona History Happy Hour.
One of Marshall's friends, Erica Kempler, watched his audience skyrocket and said it's for a good reason.
He doesn't simply study history, he's actually trying to make a significant mark in it.
And Marshall made his footprint in history at Greenwood Cemetery in Phoenix, a lawn that celebrates the people who defined Arizona.
You can tell a lot about a city by going and visiting its cemetery and seeing its history.
To Marshall, each stone in Greenwood Cemetery represents a life with a story to share. But in the case of Nikolai DeRaylen, it was the absence of a headstone that made it so significant.
It's a really amazing story.
Nikolai DeRaylen visited Arizona to treat his tuberculosis.
It didn't go so well for him. He wound up passing away a few months later.
He left behind mounds of wealth and his beloved wife, Anna.
As they're ready for burial, they discovered that Nikolai was a woman. And so when they buried him here in Greenwood in 1906, they actually buried him in a dress and without a headstone.
Erica, who is also the founder of Arizona Trans Alliance, says his story is remarkable.
It really does say here's a person who managed to live a life with a tremendous secret that would have undoubtedly destroyed his life.
Nikolai had enough money to afford a traditional burial, but Marshall explained that his unmarked grave was a sign of disrespect.
Without a headstone, he was erased from time.
Then came an idea.
When I found out that we had a gender pioneer right here in Arizona from 1906, I started working with the local community to raise funds to get him a headstone.
It was really through his invitation I became a part of it.
They capitalized efforts through social media and word of mouth.
Going to bars and people giving money here, giving money there.
In 2 years, they raised over $3,000, but the question remained, what should it say?
It was my opinion that what we put on the headstone shouldn't be outing, should not out him as trans.
My friend Erica came up with this quote and I was like, oh my God, that is perfect.
A quote that speaks truth to Nikolai and the entire transgender community.
To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment.
Now the headstone stands among the masses, securing Nikolai's spot in Arizona's LGBTQ history.
So that's one of the things I try to give those marginalized communities a voice.
A contribution that also writes Marshall into Arizona's story. In Phoenix, Caitlin Keenahan, Cronkite News.
Golf is a sport played by people from all walks of life. One of the top seeded golfers in the world lives in Arizona and he's ready to keep competing. I caught up with him as he explains his story from serving in the Army to finding a new passion on the greens. Larry Solano is currently ranked in the top 3 of the Disabled Golf World Rankings. If you see him on the course, you'll understand why.
Golf to me, it's opened a whole new world for me.
He discovered he could play golf from a seated cart in 2001 and it became a hobby for him. It wasn't until he discovered the U.S. Disabled Open in 2019 that he began realizing he could compete with others.
Okay. So that's when I really started getting more focused that, there's a whole division out there for me to play against.
While golf is his passion, it's been a long journey for Larry to end up here. After high school, he served in the U.S. Army, where in 1989, during the invasion of Panama, his life changed forever after he was shot in the back, suffering a spinal cord injury that instantly left him paralyzed from the waist down.
He rolled up to my bed and he goes, I'm here to let you know that, there's things, after your injury for being in a wheelchair. And that's when I kind of screamed at the nurse, get him out, get him out, get him out. I'm not ready for this stuff.
As tough as it was to accept, Larry knew he still had a choice, and ultimately decided he wouldn't allow his new way of life to prevent him from living it to the fullest.
This is not happening. This is not happening. And we had our little conversation, our little talk, and that was it. That's when I was like, okay, that's it. We're done. It's time to move on.
From that moment, Larry decided to never let anything in life become too much for him. This applies to golf too, as he's gone from dribbling the ball 20 yards down the green to smashing 180-yard plus drives on a consistent basis.
Well, people on the first tee will be in absolute awe as he's over here just practicing. It's very rewarding, and I'm very fortunate that I got to run into him.
Larry shines on the green not only because of his play, but his contagious laughter and spirit.
So win or lose, if naturally with golf, if I shoot in the 90s, I'm gonna be mad at myself. But if I shoot my numbers and I lose, what can you do? I mean, I'm still gonna go home. I'm still gonna laugh. I'm still gonna say, damn, what a day.
There's that spirit. For Cronkite News, I'm Jordan Spurgeon.
Imagine hiking up Paestua Peak just to find a Japanese folk music performance. Cronkite News reporters Saran and Raboyne hiked up the mountain to show us what's been happening at sunrise.
At the top of Paestua Peak during sunrise, something amazing happens. Ken Kochio, a Japanese folk artist, has hiked the mountain every day for almost a year to perform a prayer, carrying his taiko drum and instruments on his back. This prayer and ceremony has allowed him to start his day grounded in his culture and spirituality.
When the sun was up, I really feel connecting something, feeling in his soul.
This ceremony has now captured the attention of other hikers. Once people reach the top of the mountain, not only will they find Ken, but they'll find a community.
Here we're waiting for that every morning. I'm waiting to see my friends over here. We're like a small community of family, different languages. We all coming here to watch Ken and enjoy his spirit.
And while Ken's performance may be based around Japanese culture, everyone watching takes time to reflect upon their own ideals and beliefs.
Maybe what I've been doing inspired them to feel that. So maybe that gives them some kind of feeling.
So when I'm hiking, I'm not at home and he's doing the prayers. In the background, I'm doing prayers myself also.
While people of all cultures can relate to the performance, Ken maintains that it's all for his personal devotion.
Of course, this is basically for myself. And in some way, if I could inspire them, maybe they can inspire other people.
Something that started off as an individual tribute has now grown into a collective celebration of a new day. In Phoenix, Serena Raboyne, Cronkite News.
I'm Zach Keenan with Amanda Valle. It's 85 degrees and sunny out, but when is it not here in Paradise, Tempe, Arizona? Arizona State, the Sun Devils getting a midweek break from Pac-12 action with today's non-conference meetup against the Grand Canyon University Lopes.
While a homemade cloth mask may be convenient, they can become difficult to breathe through when sweating. Neck gaiters are a more comfortable option, but offer less protection. The KN95 is the most protective mask, but experts agree any mask is better than nothing at all. phrase light years was thrown around a couple of times today, and the message is totally clear. This team is way ahead of where it was at this point last spring. Hi, Sun Devil fans. Zach here for DevilsDigest.com.
Welcome into Cronkite Sports Now. I'm Zach Keenan, and NASCAR is back in the Valley. The Instacart 500 welcomed fans back to Phoenix Raceway, and the action did not disappoint. Former series champion and driver of the number 19 car, Martin Truex Jr., took the checkers for his first win on the track.
That's it for this special edition of Cronkite News tonight. Thanks for joining us. For top Arizona stories anytime, go to cronkitenews.azpbs.org.
Dating is a whole new world post-quarantine. We look at love after the lockdown, next on Break It Down.
Passport is adding new shows and doubling the number of episodes for you to stream. For the first time ever, our most popular programs have been selected just for you.
But there's so much more.
Whether you like to travel,
Wow.
feast,
And calories don't count.
look back. That is me. Discover.
You know the whole story.
There's something for everyone.
Let's get to it right away.
Stream on any device with Passport on the PBS Video app.
I was so excited when I learned that I was going to be the next moderator of Washington Week. I was incredibly lucky to be mentored by Gwen Ifill, and what that gave to me was this confidence that I could be my full self and that I was deserving of whatever spaces I was in. Welcome to Washington Week. I also feel this great joy in taking the helm of Washington Week, knowing that I can mold it and make it my own, but also make sure that it is still within the legacy and the tradition that made it so great for all of these years.
Your favorite member benefit is getting better and bigger.
This is wonderful.
Over the next year, Passport is adding new shows and doubling the number of episodes for you to stream.
They give us all that they've got.
From your favorite cooking and travel series,
Even the stairs are breathtaking.
to history specials and award-winning documentaries, better and bigger.
That really is the fun part.
Stream on any device with Passport on the PBS Video app.
What you get from Washington Week that you will not get anywhere else are the best and the brightest reporters from different media companies, and they're able to have a real conversation about things that are happening in Washington and around the country. But it's also a show about issues that are relevant to different communities. How do you think that as the moderator, I feel this deep responsibility to bring in those other perspectives so that people understand how power and politics impact their daily lives.
Friday nights at 7 on Arizona PBS.
Kevin, I really want to talk about love after lockdown. So much has changed in the way we relate with others, right? I can think of distance. I can think of, even human touch. All of these things are changing. So can you elaborate a little bit, like what has changed and what's going to happen? Is it possible to fall in love after lockdown?
So I think it definitely is possible to fall in love after lockdown. We know that humans are very social. We have a fundamental need to belong, to develop relationships and connect with others. And so because of the pandemic, the aspects of nonverbal communication that you mentioned have really been challenged. And so, for example, with distance, before lockdown started, people oftentimes utilize technology like phone calls, video chats, FaceTime, texting, etc., to stay in contact with their social circles or romantic interests, which was more of a supplement for the in-person contact. That in-person contact was still really important and it was available. Yeah. But once the pandemic hit, there were governmental mandates that were for physical distancing. There were also health concerns to worry about. And so this really caused people to decrease that physical contact with those that they didn't live with already. And so this is when technology really became a fundamental aspect of how we maintained our relationships as well as maintained our health.
It became pretty much center stage. And I can think, like, I got asked so many times to have like some video calls and let's use FaceTime. And I'm not the kind of person that I love doing that. I mean, I feel really uncomfortable, like by seeing myself in the video. It makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable and uneasy, but I'm assuming that this is going to be the new norm. Do you think so?
I think it's going to be the new norm in terms of how we connect initially, but I think that the offline aspect is still going to be really important. The in-person contact is still really going to be essential for romantic relationships and just, family relationships, friendships.
I have to say that adding the video aspect to it, it helps a little bit with the nonverbal communication, your gestures, your eye contact, because back in the days, we were just texting. And I think that, when you send a text, there's a lot of lack of nonverbal communication. And now when you're looking at the person in the video call, it changed everything because you cannot avoid, that nonverbal cues that you're offering to the person that you're talking to. So in many ways, it kind of adds a little bit more into the interpersonal aspect of the relationship, I think.
Yeah, so video chats are definitely more of a rich medium. You have access to, the eye contact, the tone of voice, facial expressions, and you're able to really get a lot more information about who the person is, what they're feeling, what they mean. Text messaging is, of course, still really important, but people will use things like emojis and bitmojis to kind of supplement and show, hey, this is kind of the emotion that I'm feeling right now, but you have to develop this unique communication pattern with specific people in order for those emojis to be understood in certain ways, kind of depending on what the dynamic of that relationship is.
And it's really interesting because I think that during the last 20 years, interpersonal relationships, as you mentioned, particularly those based on love or intimacy, have been mediated by digital platforms and apps. For example, I can think of Match.com, OkCupid, Grindr, Tinder, right? Do you think that prepares us for what we're dealing with today?
It's hard to say that we were prepared for what we experienced with the pandemic, but I do think that, kind of as you mentioned, in this digital age, we had the technological tools that were necessary for us to continue to develop and maintain those relationships, particularly with the younger generations who do tend to utilize those platforms at higher rates. And so about dating apps specifically, if we look at before the pandemic, the typical online dating script was that we would match with a couple of people, we would exchange a few messages and go on a couple of dates offline, kind of depending on what our goals were. But once the pandemic hit, we saw that dating app use actually increased as people were still really interested in developing relationships, and even more so if they were concerned about the pandemic itself. What's also interesting to note too is that they were not willing to sacrifice their standards, so things like physical attraction were still really important to them. And then in response to this, the dating apps started to evolve a little bit and introduce new features such as in-app video chats. They suggested physically distanced date ideas. They offered incentives for being vaccinated, like super likes and boosts. And research found that if you were to be vaccinated or plan to get vaccinated, you were more likely to receive about 14% more matches than if you weren't vaccinated or didn't plan to get vaccinated. And so being vaccinated has its perks, clearly, aside from just being healthy. But I do want to mention very briefly that this is where it gets really interesting and tricky, because some people who were on these dating apps tried to follow the rules and play it safe, while other people were just kind of acting as if the pandemic didn't exist. And so those who were following the rules oftentimes felt a little bit guilty for breaking those physical distancing guidelines when they're on dates. And other people who were having a hard time adapting to just the CMC only, the video chat only, also were likely to break those guidelines. And so before vaccinations, and now without proof of vaccination status, people were and literally are putting their lives on the line to meet their matches. And I think this really speaks to a strong desire that we have to socially connect and develop these relationships. So I think first and foremost, one recommendation I would have is, get vaccinated and have a conversation with your partner or your matches about it. We know that vaccines are highly effective in preventing serious illness, hospitalizations, and death. Breakthrough cases might occur, but you are still highly protected if you are vaccinated. And so if you're using online dating apps, or if you're just dating in general, knowing that you and your partner or your match are both vaccinated can really take some of the stress and anxiety away from dating, so you can really focus on learning about the person and being in the presence of the other person.
And if building a relationship during a pandemic using these kind of communication methods is challenging, I can imagine breaking up, right? That's an extra layer that complicates things even further, I think, right? Do you think there's something that we're never gonna go back in terms of like what we had before and how we relate with other people and how we meet people online, that because of all of this now change? Do you think that we're gonna keep some of these new elements or new I don't know, stages of building relationships?
I think the technology is really going to be really necessary. I don't think the technology is going away anytime soon. I really think the technology is going to continue to evolve. I don't necessarily know what it's going to look like, but we've seen that dating apps are willing and able to, increase their features and get a little more tech savvy for helping people meet others and connect. And so I think that's really going to be key. But based on the need that we have to connect and what I know about human communication overall, is that we need this in-person contact. Going through Zoom and having conversations or texting back and forth, it really only gets us so far for so long, but we actually need to get back into being in person, being around others. We are the social creatures, as I mentioned. And so I think that we have to remember that if we're safe, if we can be around others, we should be doing that when the time is right.
Kevin, thank you very much for helping me break it down.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
This hour of local news is made possible by contributions from the Friends of PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you. If you have comments about Arizona PBS News, please contact us at one of the addresses on your screen. Thank you.